Welcome to the House of Hypertrophy. It's estimated creatine sales exceed over $400 million per year, and that Americans consume over 4 million kilograms of the supplement per year. But how effective is creatine for building muscle and strength? Today we're going to dissect the most up-to-date literature on the topic, and we'll also touch on some other popular topics surrounding creatine. Let's dive in. The discovery of creatine is credited to this person in 1832 who extracted the compound from meat. However, it wasn't until the 1990s where, following the Barcelona Olympics in 1992, some British athletes admitted to using creatine after winning gold. In the following Olympics in Atlanta in 1996, it was estimated 80% of athletes were using creatine. This origin story may explain why some wonder if creatine is an anabolic steroid. But rest assured, creatine is most definitely not an anabolic steroid. You still get to keep your natty card with creatine consumption. It also appears that in 1993, a company under the name of EAS was the first to produce commercially available creatine under the name Phosphagen. Since the 90s, over 500 peer-reviewed scientific studies have examined creatine. Before examining creatine's impact on muscle growth and strength, let's quickly mention some creatine facts and its effects on the body. The majority of creatine in the body is found in muscles. The total creatine pool in muscle averages 120 millimoles per kilogram for a 70 kg individual. Your body urinates about 1 to 2% of intramuscular creatine per day, so around 1 to 3 grams of creatine is needed to maintain creatine stores. Some of this comes from the liver and kidney synthesizing it, while for omnivores, various animal foods further provide a source of creatine. Vegetarians and vegans won't obtain this, and so actually tend to have lower creatine stores within their muscles. This raises an interesting question. Do vegetarians and vegans see greater benefits from creatine? This will be addressed later. The upper limit of intramuscular creatine seems to be around 160 millimoles per kilogram in most individuals, so supplementing with creatine can help you reach these levels. Attaining these levels likely enhances your performance during intense activity. Why? Muscle fibers generate energy for various processes, including contraction, via breaking down a molecule called ATP into ADP. Creatine has the ability to donate a phosphate group to ADP, turning it back into ATP, thereby enabling it to generate energy again. ATP stores are rapidly depleted during intense muscular effort, so increasing intramuscular creatine via creatine supplementation enables you to replenish ATP stores faster, enhancing performance. Creatine has been documented to enhance muscle hypertrophy, and we'll uncover how much shortly. But most believe creatine enhances hypertrophy because of creatine's ability to increase exercise capacity by way of replenishing ATP. But I'm skeptical that this explains the entirety of creatine's muscle building benefits, or even any of it. The reason for this is other supplements have been documented to similarly increase exercise capacity, but fail to enhance long-term hypertrophy. As reviewed by this paper, other plausible mechanisms behind creatine's gains exist. Creatine could directly increase activity of intracellular signaling pathways that promote hypertrophy, and or even decrease the activity of intracellular pathways that inhibit hypertrophy. Don't worry if any of this sounds too complex. Just know there are multiple ways creatine could help build more muscle. The more important question is how much more muscle does creatine help you build? Since 2014, 5 meta-analyses have explored how creatine may help the lean mass gains you see from resistance training. Meta-analyses, for those unaware, combine the results of numerous studies looking at the same topic. These analyses tend to find creatine boosts the lean mass gains you experience from resistance training by 1 to 1.4 kilograms across largely a 7 to 14 week period. However, one potentially important consideration is that lean mass, since it's all the non-fat tissue which isn't just muscle tissue, isn't considered the highest quality measure of hypertrophy. Instead, directly measuring the growth of specific muscles via ultrasound or MRI is considered to be more reliable and precise. Fortunately, we have a recent meta-analysis that examines how creatine directly influenced the growth of specific muscles. 10 studies were included, and when looking at the triceps, elbow flexors, quadriceps, and hamstrings, creatine supplementation produced a 0.10 to 0.16 centimeter greater increase in muscle thickness compared to taking a placebo. The researchers measured the effect sizes of these results. Effect sizes are simply a measure of how big or small an effect is. The overall effect size was 0.11, which the researchers noted to actually be a trivial effect, that is, less than small. This led to the conclusion that the practical significance of creatine for hypertrophy may be minimal. But there is a major problem with this conclusion. The researchers used effect size thresholds that were derived from and tailored for interpreting strength and power gains. So using these thresholds on muscle hypertrophy data isn't necessarily sensible. Fortunately, Greg Nuckols from Stronger by Science recently formulated effect size thresholds specifically tailored to and derived from the hypertrophy research. The 0.11 effect size falls into a small to medium effect, making it look better. Furthermore, if we compare this beneficial creatine effect size to the overall effect size seen in the hypertrophy research, we come to the conclusion that creatine helps you build muscle 1/3 faster. Before moving on to discussing non-responders and high responders, some people may be wondering what type of hypertrophy creatine might produce. Let me explain. Muscle fibers consist of the contractile proteins and the sarcoplasm, which is largely fluid but contains numerous components. The current evidence indicates muscle fibers primarily grow through increasing both the contractile proteins and sarcoplasm at relatively the same rates. Creatine is an osmolyte, which means it can draw in water. Indeed, this paper found creatine supplementation produced an increase in intracellular water content. Thus, some of the increase in muscle size from creatine is likely due to increased fluid in the sarcoplasm of muscle fibers. But we still have evidence creatine may enhance growth of the contractile proteins, and recall we detailed potential mechanisms by which creatine could grow the contractile proteins. Therefore, creatine is probably growing both the sarcoplasm and contractile proteins, but more research is needed for determining the precise proportions. One thing to keep in mind is since some of the extra gains from creatine is likely water-induced, its pure muscle size benefit might reduce long term, since once muscle creatine levels are fully saturated, presumably no extra water-induced gains occur. Moreover, once you stop taking creatine and muscle creatine levels return to baseline, presumably any water-induced size gains you had will be lost. This doesn't necessarily mean creatine has little benefits over the long term, as we can't rule out the possibility of creatine still producing solid extra contractile protein gains over the very long term, or that it still enhances sarcoplasm growth via mechanisms independent of the water gains purely associated with the creatine molecules. Future research is required. So creatine may help you build muscle 1/3 faster, yet it's important to point out this is an average. Some people may experience an even greater benefit, while others much less. As detailed in this excellent classic paper, there are non-responders, partial responders, and high responders to creatine supplementation. It's estimated 20 to 30% of people could be non-responders. Non-responders tend to have higher initial creatine stores, lower muscle fiber sizes, and lower fat-free mass. Higher responders have the opposite of all this. This raises an interesting question. Recall vegetarians and vegans tend to have lower muscle creatine stores. Does this mean they are generally higher responders to creatine? There only appears to be this Canadian paper, 18 vegetarians, 3 of them actually vegan, and 24 non-vegetarians supplemented with either creatine or a placebo during 8 weeks of lifting. The vegetarian group that supplemented with creatine saw the greatest increases in creatine stores, lean mass, and endurance versus the non-vegetarians, but strength gains were similar between both. So overall, vegetarians and vegans may indeed generally be higher responders. Age is another potentially notable factor. We've mentioned that this meta-analysis found creatine's beneficial boost in muscle hypertrophy equated to an effect size of 0.11. However, the researchers did perform separate analyses on younger and older adults. The younger adults saw an effect size benefit of 0.23, which suggests an even greater benefit of creatine supplementation. The older adults saw an effect size benefit of 0.06, which suggests a much smaller benefit of creatine supplementation. I believe more studies are required to properly conclude older adults experience relatively low hypertrophy benefit from creatine supplementation. It's also worth considering that older adults may largely, not always though, build less muscle, so this could contribute to the seemingly lower effects of creatine. But variability between older adults may still exist. For example, one paper in older adults still found creatine supplementation resulted in pretty meaningful more overall hypertrophy. So far, we've just been talking about muscle building, but what about strength gains? These meta-analyses established creatine supplementation boosted bench press and back squat strength with effects that would probably be described as small to moderate. In percentage terms, this classic review paper indicates creatine supplementation increased strength by 8 extra percentage points and muscular endurance by 14 extra percentage points. But similar to the hypertrophy discussion, variability between individuals likely exists. For example, this paper found over 12 weeks of lifting, a group taking creatine increased their bench press 1 rep max strength by 22.6 kilograms, while a group not taking creatine increased their bench press 1 rep max strength by 15 kilograms. But other papers find reduced benefits, such as this paper which found over 8 weeks of lifting, creatine supplementation increased the bench press 1 rep max strength by 6.8 kilograms, while not taking creatine led to a not too far off 5.7 kilogram increase. As a final point for this section, older adults do seem to reap respectable strength gains from creatine, as this meta-analysis which analyzed studies specifically on older adults established enhanced chest press and leg press strength with these small to moderate effect sizes. Let us dissect what the research says about other popular conversations surrounding creatine. There is evidence that creatine may enhance recovery and reduce markers of muscle damage after a single training session, although it's a little ambiguous if this continues in the long term. Nonetheless, survey data suggests a large bulk of athletes subjectively feel enhanced recovery from creatine supplementation. The concern about creatine and hair loss originates from this 2009 study, which found creatine supplementation increased DHT levels. Since DHT has been linked with hair loss, some say this means creatine causes hair loss. However, there are major problems with this conclusion. This is merely one study on 20 rugby players that has never been replicated. The increase in DHT was well within the normal physiological range, and there's even a case to be made that this was a false positive. I've expanded on this false positive point in the pinned comment and description if you're interested. Plus, we have other evidence finding creatine doesn't increase other androgens like free testosterone. Perhaps the most crucial final point is, as explained by Greg Nuckols from Stronger by Science, the researchers measured serum DHT levels, and this isn't strongly related to hair loss. Instead, it's the local DHT in the scalp that is. So in total, it is accurate for me to say there is zero scientific evidence associating creatine with actual hair loss. It would be dishonest of me to say creatine does absolutely not cause hair loss, because absence of evidence does not mean evidence of absence. But for now, there's as much scientific evidence of creatine causing hair loss as there is evidence for apples causing hair loss. But what about the anecdotes? You can find many online attributing various hair problems to their creatine supplementation. There's a good reason anecdotes are generally poor quality evidence. They suffer from imprecise to no actual measurements and a multitude of confounders. Moreover, the rise of the mere idea that creatine accelerates hair loss may just lead people erroneously attributing their hair changes to creatine, when if they went back in time and never took creatine, but still paid close attention to their hair would have seen identical changes. Ultimately, there's going to be a significant overlap in the people predisposed to hair loss and people who lift weights and opt to try creatine. If you're seriously concerned, you may just want to wait and see if future studies come out. Creatine monohydrate is simply the most studied form of creatine. However, there are alternative forms of creatine on the market claiming to be superior. What does the research say? We have this review paper. Firstly, the researchers reviewed the marketplace and demonstrated how all the alternative creatine forms cost more. But importantly, none of the alternative forms have been proven to be superior to monohydrate, and some of them don't even consistently outperform placebos. Therefore, monohydrate remains the most studied form that is the cheapest and effective. The fundamental purpose of supplementing creatine is to fully saturate your muscle creatine levels, which thereby reaps the benefits. There are two approaches commonly taken. The first approach uses a loading phase, which has you ingest 20 to 25 grams, typically split into 4 or 5 daily doses, for 5 to 7 days. This aims to fully saturate muscle creatine stores, and from here you just take 3 to 5 grams daily to maintain this. The second approach is to forget about loading and just consume 3 to 5 grams per day. This will delay saturation, but this does not matter long term. For example, taking 3 grams per day probably saturates muscle creatine stores in 28 days, and extrapolating from other data, taking 5 grams per day may do this in around 14 days. Feel free to select the approach you prefer. The second approach, though delaying saturation, is cheaper. Moreover, mild gastrointestinal discomfort is seen in some individuals from creatine, and this may be more likely when taking higher doses as done during loading, so the second approach may be better here too. Now, when comparing a 3 to 5 gram daily dose over the long term, one paper largely finds similar strength adaptations, so 3 grams may be sufficient for the large majority of people. I will also note that a classic paper established 2 grams of creatine was sufficient to maintain saturated muscle creatine stores after a loading phase, which further supports the notion lower doses may be sufficient for the majority of people, although it is likely larger individuals will benefit from doses closer to 5 grams. Scale to body mass, 0.04 grams per kilogram each day may work. There's no evidence that you need to cycle creatine. Long-term consumption is also safe. Some have raised concerns relating to the kidneys, but this stems from a poor understanding of creatine and creatinine metabolism and a case study published in 1998. Creatinine increases from supplementation are not believed to be a problem, and the 1998 case study had multiple shortcomings. We have other data, and as concluded in this massive review, adverse effects are not seen. When they are, multiple confounders such as these are in play. Does the time of day you consume creatine matter? Fascinatingly, a meta-analysis found lean mass gains were better when supplementing with creatine after training compared to before training. However, there were merely 3 studies in this meta-analysis. Strength gains were also similar regardless of when creatine was supplemented. We've also had another paper come out since this analysis, finding similar hypertrophy and strength gains between supplementing before and after training. Overall, I'd say timing isn't a make or break factor, and this is especially likely true in the long term when creatine stores are fully saturated, so just consume it whenever you like. At the end of the day, supplements like creatine are the cherry on top. Consistent and effective training is going to be the source of the majority of your gains. The high-quality Alpha Progression app has all the features any lifter needs in one place. It's flawlessly crafted to help you stay motivated and consistent with effective training to achieve your desired physique and strength levels. The app can remove confusion and generate a program 100% customized to your desires in 1 minute or less. Let it know the equipment you have and how much time you have available to commit to training. If you have certain muscles you like to focus on more or less, the app can accommodate for this too. There's more than a quadrillion input combinations on which your plan will be based on, and the training philosophy is inspired by the latest meta-analyses and reviews. With the touch of a few buttons, you can personalize things even further if you like. You can switch out exercises, change the rep numbers, or add or decrease sets depending on how you feel. The latest update provides you with unlockable achievements to reward your effort and help sustain motivation to help you reach your ambitions. Invaluable time is also saved as the app automatically generates graphs tracking your long-term progression. The link in the comments and description unlocks 2 weeks free of trying out all the premium features of the app. And if you like it and choose to go further, the link gives you 20% off a subscription. I genuinely believe the app is phenomenal, with the numerous reviews speaking to this. In summary, since creatine's emergence on the market in the 1990s, it has become one of the most well-researched supplements that has been established to be safe, and it enhances hypertrophy and strength with what we can probably describe as small to moderate effects. But variability exists. Some may see larger benefits, while others may be non-responders. Creatine monohydrate is the most time-tested form. Other forms are more expensive and have failed to produce superior effects to monohydrate in the current literature. You can have a loading phase if you wish, but it's not essential and it technically costs more, plus it may cause GI discomfort for some. Thank you for watching. Feel free to check out the Alpha Progression app or our recent deep dive into building the lats.